Hello and welcome to Heart and Mind with Dr. Dina McMillan. As you've probably guessed, I'm Dr. Dina McMillan, and today this episode is going to be on fire. I really thought about it before I did this, but this is so important and it needs to be discussed, and it's helpful if someone who looks like me and thinks like me actually discusses this topic. So, thank you for joining me as we look at reverse racism and why that's still racism, and how the anti white bias that has heated up over the last 7, 8 years is so harmful to all of us of every color. So, thank you, and let's take a look. Now, I have promised you no more boring Tuesdays. I've promised you that we're going to talk about things that you won't hear anywhere else, not from this perspective, because I don't just discuss problems. We don't just sit and moan and groan about how bad the world is. Every episode is about solutions as well. And I'm talking about solutions that can be done or at least started on the micro level in your own life, going all the way up to the people who are leading our society, whether it's business people or the government. Now, we're on every Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You can watch us live on X, on Rumble, on Daily Clout, on Getter. And you can even watch us live on Facebook if you go to the Daily Clout page. You may be doing that right now. If you're watching us live, please sign in so you can actually make comments, ask questions while we're going, and I can answer them right away. Now, if you're watching the recording of this, please know you can watch the recording. I usually post the recorded episodes on my X page, which is at Dr. Dina 1, but you can also see it on Rumble, on Daily Clout, and on YouTube. Now, why do I keep saying everything I do is different? Because unlike everyone else who has a podcast, who has a show, I'm a social psychologist. And what we do, we study power dynamics, but importantly, we also study the brain and how we learn, how we're influenced and persuaded, how we're manipulated and coerced, how we're indoctrinated and even brainwashed. And because my field of study doesn't just look at what happens naturally in the world, we also do experiments where we will have social psychologists intentionally change someone's beliefs and behavior without alerting that person that it was an outside force changing their minds. You need to know that, because these methods are being used everywhere in our society, not just in marketing tactics to get you to buy things you don't really need, or in politics to get you to vote for someone you don't really trust. They're used everywhere. Every time you watch a show streamed on the main streaming networks like Netflix, you are being persuaded, influenced, indoctrinated in ways you may not recognize. And guess what? Even if you catch the methods, if you keep exposing yourself to those messages, they will still have an influence. I'm here to help. I'm here to talk about things. And I want to tell you something that is really important. I had some second thoughts about today's topic. Because if you watched this show before, you know that when I did an episode honoring Charlie Kirk and his contribution of using facts to dispute a lot of left-wing propaganda, I was really attacked by people I know, people I've known for a long time, including a member of my immediate family whom I had to block off my social media account because she was so vehement that everything bad that was said about Charlie Kirk was the truth, which let me know she'd not done her research. She was letting other people tell her how to interpret what he was doing. And I knew that for a Black woman to come forward and talk about how wrong it is to have anti-white discrimination, the usual suspects are going to get mad at me. So I hope that you will continue to contribute. You will ask questions. You will watch the show. You'll get other people to watch the show, because I've been facts over feelings my entire career, even in graduate school, and I've had to pay for it. Now, talk about facts over feelings. I hope all of you, as a Christmas present to all of your savvy people in your life, get the Pfizer papers. Get this. This is so important, because please recognize not a single person who was forcing us to get those jabs has gone to jail. Every day you open the paper, you open social media, you see more and more proof of how dangerous the COVID-19 vaccine is. And yet they're still offering it. No one who decided the mandates, who controlled the protocol in the hospitals that resulted in the deaths of thousands of people, none of them have been prosecuted. So you need to know how to protect yourself and your family. Step one, get the knowledge. Go on Amazon and get your own copy of the Pfizer papers. It's written for average people, for regular people who aren't physicians. Dr. Naomi Wolf and Amy Kelly and the team took all of this information and deciphered it for us so that we would know what was really going on. So do yourself a favor and support Daily Cloud in our historic work to bring facts and truth to the public. So, let's get to the juicy part. Let's talk about today's topic. Reverse racism is still racism, and anti-white bias hurts us all. I know that tonight, right before I came on, I saw Elon Musk actually post something about ending this anti-white propaganda. It's been going on, I'd say at least 10, 15 years, but it really heated up around the time of the Black Lives Matter, the Rodney King protests. You had all of the supposed anti-racism propaganda, all of those anti-racism programs. We still have DEI programs being mandated in many businesses. I still come up against it, working in community services, working in domestic violence prevention. The vast majority of people in my field are firmly convinced that the left-wing Democrat propaganda is God's honest truth. And they get very angry with me when I don't buy into it. And you'll note a lot of these episodes are about how do you handle people like that? Because just giving them the facts is not going to undo indoctrination. And in fact, I sent a little note to Elon Musk saying, if you want somebody to start putting together programs to undo the indoctrination that is harming so many people, including so many young white people, let me know. I'm ready to help. Because racism, judging people on the color of their skin, not the content of their character, I thought we went through this already. I was horrified when the anti-racism programs started becoming popular, because once I examined what they were teaching, that wasn't anti-racism. That was, I'm going to make you insecure so I can take advantage of you. That's what that was. That was, let's destroy Western society by filling these beautiful cities built by people who sacrificed so much. Let's fill these cities with people from hostile environments, many of them with low intelligence, a lot of inbreeding going on with some of these groups. Let's just destroy Western society and leave a tiny little elite that are behind gated communities, behind walls, that don't have to live with the consequences of what they're advocating. And I know you have some opinions on this. So let's talk about it. Let's look at the anti-white bias and why it has to be opposed. If you believe in justice and fairness, I don't care what political party you belong to or if you don't vote at all. This is so harmful to society. I know when I was growing up and experiencing, and even I want to tell you something, I have experienced racism against me for being Black all of my life. So anybody who says racism is gone, it's never disappeared. I've always had to deal with it. And I always knew the solution was not to reverse it and exploit and harass and mistreat white people. That's not the solution. We didn't sacrifice and march for that. We wanted racism to go away, to not be the measure of a person, but to look at their character, their abilities, their talents. That's what we wanted. Not to abuse white people, to be vengeful because we think white people have something we don't. That is not taking us anywhere positive. But I also have to say before I go on, it is crucial that we do this. I know a lot of you are angry, and I'm hoping a lot of you are watching this because you know becoming an absolute ardent racist against anyone who's not white is not the solution. We don't want to go back and forth. We don't want a race war. You can actually oppose this anti-white racism without becoming a villain yourself. And we're going to talk about how to do that. So I want you to stay with me. What if the next big financial crash is already in motion and almost no one sees it coming? Every major economic collapse since 1929 was preceded by the same 7 warning signals. And right now, all 7 are flashing red at the same time. These aren't headlines. They're deep market indicators that Wall Street prefers you never hear about. That's why our friends at American Alternative Assets created the Bellwether Signal, a free report that reveals what these signals mean and how smart Americans are protecting their savings with gold and silver before it's too late. You can download your free copy right now at cloutgold.com or call us at 855-803-GOLD. Again, that's cloutgold.com or call 1-855-803-4653. Get the facts, protect your future, and don't wait for the headlines to catch up. Now, have any of you seen this woman before? She was all over social media winning awards, and all she did was put something up saying F white people. Now, she's white herself, but if I'm not mistaken, she's part of a rainbow crowd. So, of course, she gets away with things that other people would not. Right now, Pew Research says that 54% of whites have noticed that anti-white sentiment is a problem. In 2019, 39% of people noticed that it was going on. And I want to tell you something. It's been really happening for the most part since 2005. I noticed it since 2005. Okay. But again, I'm a social scientist. So I've been taught to pick up signs and indicators that the average person might miss. I knew it was a problem then. I know it's a problem now. I think to award somebody for saying this is a travesty. Here's some perspective. The photo on the left is real. It's from the UK where these white women are carrying a sign that says, ban white men. Let's ask, what would happen if a group of black women carried a sign that said, ban black men? Would they be getting applause and accolades, or would everybody toss things at them? Would they get arrested? Would they get ostracized? Would they be vilified? This is absolutely ridiculous. And I can't believe that the average person has allowed it to go on for so long. What if these roles were reversed? Here's Ashley Shackelford back in 2020. Oh, if you actually watch her entire presentation, she likens being white to being demonic. And it's so funny because she has the most pleasant, soft voice. And she just says the most evil things. But notice she says here, all white people are racist, but underneath it, in case you can't see, screenshot it. It says, PayPal me. So she's telling people if you feel guilty about being white, which was a really big thing in 2019 and 2020, you can get over your guilt by paying her money. That's how Black Lives Matter was able to get millions of dollars in donations. They convinced white people that you are all villains, that oppression that happened a century ago, 60 years ago, is all your fault. Well, at the same time, acts by Black people that happened last week should be excused because of slavery. What kind of logic is that? And would Black people sit quietly if somebody stood up at the front of the room, first of all, in that incredibly inappropriate outfit? Spandex is not for everyone, okay? She stands there in this completely inappropriate outfit, saying all white people are racist. What if somebody said all Black people are inferior and stood up in the front of a room? What would happen? What would happen to them? Would they ever work again? This woman is continuing to have a successful career. People are paying her to come and speak. Why? Why are these people getting away with this? Because of something that I've spoken about before. Now, if you're new and you've not watched this show before, please watch some of my previous episodes where I talk about why people are woke, where I go over some of the social psychology tactics, the psychological manipulation tactics that are being used to convince people to have self-hatred issues and allow themselves to be manipulated and exploited. And there's a name for the phenomenon. It's called pathocratic subversion. It's a system of government or society where a small pathological minority, we all know who they are, takes control, often characterized by the perversion of moral values, and the use of coded language to manipulate and control the population. Now, one of the things that I have and put together a class that I'm going to be offering next year called Why You're Not a Racist. And I talked about this type of pathocratic subversion where the Democrats and the left, because if you're not, some of the people watching this are not in America, but we have the left using the same methods in whatever country you happen to be in. They have changed the definitions of language so that it fits their narrative. And it's all part of a plan to take over society and then lead to our ruin. It's a two-step process in an easy way. Let's talk about racism, for instance. Most of you grew up with the term racist being a very derogatory term. It would hurt you. It would make you sit back if somebody said, hey, you're just saying that because you're racist. If you watched All in the Family from the 1970s, Archie Bunker was the bad guy because he would make comments about people of other races, some of which were actually true based on statistics. But he was seen as the guy to laugh at and mock because he was a racist. So the left decided, hey, let's use whatever term we can come up with that people have been conditioned to recoil from, and let's use that to control them. So they gain or regain compliance. You've noticed that everybody that opposes their horrible methods is called a racist, a Nazi, or whatever. Somebody produced this little golden book. Everyone I don't like is Hitler. And I have to admit, I downloaded that picture. I think, I don't know who did it, but if you know, please let me know so I can give them credit because it's brilliant. But I've been using it for at least 6 years because they've been using these methods for at least 10. And we had a Coca-Cola campaign where they were teaching in their DEI courses, they were telling people to be less white, and they aren't the only one. We're dealing with a lot of reverse racism against white people. One of my friends from high school who contacted me when I was going to have the Charlie Kirk show, and which is inflamed my sibling, who then went on a rant about how horrible Charlie was and how my parents would be ashamed to be, just went on a rant about it. His company actually faced a terrible situation where one of the people in charge made a comment that somebody decided was racist, and they had to hire somebody to come in and do DEI training and all of that. Don't do that, because all it's doing is ceding control to these awful people. We're going to talk about what to do instead. I'm not telling you give up your ambition for a more just and fair society. I still want that. I hope you do too. We're going to talk about how to do it, because the reverse racism that's going on now, it's all about humiliating white people, shaming white people, which then builds resentment, which results in backlash. 70 years of research shows that unjust humiliation of people is the single biggest predictor of extremism. You know how in It's a Wonderful Life, the little girl says, every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings. Well, every time the left comes up with another stupid idea, another label for someone just asking questions, white extremists, nationalists get a whole new group of members, because people feel like there's no way I can win unless I have to protect myself and my family. There's no way I can win with these people. The only way they will accept me is if I bow before them and allow them to lie about me and my people, to take responsibility for things that I haven't done, and allow them not to take responsibility for things they have done. There's another alternative, people. Please don't join the KKK, please, because nobody wins. America doesn't win when we have a race war. Critical race theory does something similar to Black people. It's interesting because I wrote a chapter in a book with other psychologists and therapists, and we wrote the book because what I talked about in the book was critical race theory and how activism and critical race theory convince people, Black people, you will never be accepted, you will never belong, you are a perennial victim, your only righteous response is anger and aggression. How is that going to help anybody? And the book is called Cynical Therapies. And if you look on Amazon, you can probably find a copy. I even, with one of my co-authors, we even wrote a short film to actually describe the damage that is being done to Black people through things like critical race theory, like allowing Black people who commit crimes to not pay for those crimes. We are not helping our people at all. Our ancestors would be ashamed. And there's another message here. Critical race theory, affirmative action, DEI hire, all of that teaches Blacks and Hispanics that we are unable to compete on a level playing field. So instead of saying, okay, what's keeping young Black kids from doing as well on standardized tests? Why don't we put some tutoring programs in predominantly Black areas? Why don't we make these tutoring programs accessible to every kid who wants it, whatever their color. No, instead of that, we're going to let somebody get into Harvard with substandard grades. I've mentioned before, I didn't put my race on my application to Stanford, so they assumed I was white. They were very shocked when I showed up. I did not want people to say you got in because you're Black. I can tell you something else, though, that nobody talks about. I was treated very badly because I'm Black. I faced racism unlike anything I'd experienced since I was a kid at Stanford University. And it wasn't just me. There were enough Black women who were being terribly discriminated against that we had a dean that was going to actually sue the university. That's how bad it was. But I got through. How did I get through? I studied. I worked hard. I remembered my history. I knew that people had been set on by dogs and hanged from trees, so I'd even have a chance to be there. I told my dissertation advisor they had 2 ways to get rid of me because they just treated me so badly. And my one chair even asked me, how do you handle being treated so differently than everyone else? It's a private university, so they discriminated against me like something you'd see at the turn of the century at West Point. They asked, how do you handle it? I said, eyes on the prize. And I knew how hard and how much sacrifice other Black people had, all those sacrifices they made so I could compete. But I wasn't asking anybody to let me get away with something because I was Black, because I'd had family that was enslaved. Everybody's been conquered. If that's the case, every European university should give first priority to people from Poland. If you look at the history of the world over the last 500 years, every time somebody got a bee in their bonnet, they were conquering Poland. But you don't see the Poles saying, oh, you should feel sorry for me and everybody should let me in the university, even though I'm not qualified. And then you have racist liberals appointing people to positions they are not qualified for, because then they have complete control over those individuals. Do they reach out to Black conservatives like me? No, they do not. Because they know I can see through what they're doing and their racist policies. I've earned everything I have, and so have a lot of other Black people, but you don't hear about us as often. That's one of the reasons we need to get the word out. Let's end this racism. Let's end this discrimination on any side, because having Black people and white people in America at each other's throats, who wins? Nobody. The only people that win are the politicians who get disenfranchised, angry, self-victimizing people to keep voting them in office so that they can rob the taxpayer. Those are the only ones who win. Our society doesn't win. We don't gain from this. We have to fight back, people. We have to fight back, but not by becoming an ardent racist, not by saying, oh, your people are dumb. No, nobody in my family is dumb. Okay, my great-grandfather was a professor at the University of Colorado. Can you imagine how hard that was? I have a great uncle who became a lawyer after being a Tuskegee Airman. So that's not true. Now, let's talk about what's really going on. Because again, if you're new, welcome, welcome. But please understand, I never talk about a problem without talking about a solution. When I saw what was going on with all the anti-racism nonsense, with white fragility and people having anti-racist programs where they're paying huge amounts of money to people to stand there and chastise them and say that they're an oppressor, this is what I did. I was like, oh my God. So I developed a program to actually address this. And one of the things we talk about, again, I have another class called Biases and Bigotry, and I'm going to start offering it online. So contact me. I'm going to start offering it online because it is something not only good for you to know, but it will give you receipts that you can use when you're dealing with someone who's accusing you of something you haven't done. Bias is natural. We're all biased. I mean, I have a bias, I admit it, against people who put pineapple on pizza. I just, ooh, I shudder to think. I kind of wonder what's going on with those folks, okay? Bias is natural. It's a cognitive shortcut our brain does so that we can quickly, as we go through our lives, quickly differentiate enemies from friends. That's all it is. And of course, bias is you develop a bias based on life experience, or you're taught. Be careful of those. Be careful of that. It's one of the reasons I would say, just as an aside, in order for the left to start taking over, they had to get people out of the churches. Because one of the things in all of the churches they talked about is how to identify evil. How to identify evil early. And the left didn't want you to know that because they wanted to convince you that evil isn't evil, it's just misunderstood. Now, bias can be for or against. Now, there's more information on bias you need to know, but this show's only an hour, so I can't go into too much of it. But you can be biased for or against a person, a group, a type of food, whatever. And it's perceptual, not intellectual. It's based on the primal drives in the brain. If you've watched earlier episodes of this show, or if you want to go back and watch earlier episodes of this show, I talk about how the brain works and how the intellectual part of our brain is very separate from our primal drives, and it's separate even from our emotions. So when people are indoctrinated to have bias, when they are taught to have bias, when they develop bias, it's not usually in the intellectual part of the brain. So there's no link between bias and intelligence. You're just as likely to be a very biased person against a person or group if you are academically advanced as if you are just an average person. So don't think intellect saves you. It really doesn't. And with the class, I talk about how that's done. Now, here's the program that I have that actually, if you are in charge of anything, whether it's a school, university, community center, organization, this is what you can offer instead of DEI training. We talk about how to get rid of bias, but without making the white people feel like oppressors, without making people feel guilty for being normal humans. And what we do is emphasize common factors, how to build on those common factors so that people with very different beliefs can still work together effectively as a team without what we have now, which is only left-wing woke beliefs are validated by most organizations. So anybody who believes differently feels persuaded, influenced, even coerced to alter their beliefs, or at least what they say are their beliefs, while they're at work. That creates huge divisions. It makes things worse. I don't do that. So contact me if you want to know more, because it can be done online. It can be done in person. It's fun. It's interesting. And everything I do is designed to work with how the brain works. So when I offer a program, it's designed to be memorable, so that when you're in a situation where you need that information, you still remember what to do. Most programs are done in a way that only reaches the intellectual part of the brain, the neocortex, the front of the brain, the frontal lobe. So when you're in a heightened circumstance, when something occurs, that information is just not accessible, and you don't remember it till later when you say, oh, I should have done like I did, like they taught us in that class. No. So let's get back to the topic that brought us here today. Anti-white bias. And it started a little bit with, all the way back with Die Hard. For a while there, did you guys notice for a while, all the bad guys were always English, right? Now, here's what they do. This is why social psychology is important, because it not only talks about what people do to influence you, it discusses and points out what they don't do. Nobody ever mentioned the cost of multiculturalism. Nobody ever talked about the cost to society of having a huge influx of immigrants, whether legal or illegal, who don't share the culture, speak the language, they send huge amounts of money that they earn in America back to their home countries, so our country doesn't benefit from it. Nobody really talks about that. And so often, the bad guys first were English, and then over the last 5 years, it's always straight white men. This is designed to make white people feel guilty, wrong, and self-conscious. The only get out of jail free card is if you're an uber liberal white woman, like the kind who said, "Oh, I put a tape over my mouth when Black women are speaking because we need to let them speak." What kind of gesture is that? That's stupid. Or if you are part of the LGBTQ group, you get a free pass. Everybody else, if you're a straight white guy, hardworking, take care of your family, you are vilified constantly. And the women in your family are being taught that everything about you is toxic and that they are entitled to disrespect and mistreat you. We got to get rid of that too. I've had earlier shows where I've talked about how the way women are being taught to treat men is a problem. And a lot of women are finding, I can't find a good partner for a relationship. Yeah, because you don't know how to treat men. That's why. But they didn't come up with it on their own. They're being taught this. Now let's talk about the whole DEI thing, which is also, when was the last time you saw a British show, if you ever watched British shows, where they had somebody at the top of the law enforcement hierarchy that was actually a white male? It's always women. Nobody talks about the fact that often when we have women in those positions in law enforcement and even in the defense forces, they don't do very well. A lot of our natural inclinations as women, we need additional training to make us good leaders in forums like that, and nobody talks about that. There are documents, though, leaked documents from DEI corporate training, from Disney, Google, IBM, Coca-Cola, teaching white people you occupy unearned space and must decenter yourselves. Can you imagine if they did the same thing to any minority group? Oh my goodness, their stock would plummet. Really, we have to stop accepting this. It's just wrong is wrong. This is just evil. And being treated this way, being told that it's your responsibility, slavery was your fault and you're an oppressor. You're like, none of my family owned slaves. And wait a minute, wasn't that over 150 years ago anyway? Yeah. DEI programs right now are creating trauma, and they're increasing the divisions between groups and breeding resentment. They've done studies on this, first in the UK, and Kemi Badenoch, who's the head of the Tory party right now, wrote an incredible article where she referenced the study that was done that found DEI training doesn't build bridges between groups. It just builds resentment and divisions. And a year later, they did studies here in the United States and found the same effect. That's why I would keep talking about my Healing the Rift program. It talks about the problems of bias, but it is not DEI training. Oh my goodness, no. Here are some issues with DEI. It overcorrects by having quotas and preferences. I know in Australia, where I lived for quite a while, in Australia, they brag about, oh, 50% of the Labor Party is women. So they grab really unqualified women and put them in these positions of authority that they don't even know how to do their jobs, overlooking men who are hardworking, good leaders, earned their way, and just say, oh, no, well, we need a quota here. So we're proud of ourselves for having 50%. Or, I mean, look at our Supreme Court. Oh, Brown Jackson needs to be replaced. She is an auto pen hire. She needs to be gotten rid of. She's letting down the team. And can you imagine how hard it is for women who look like me, who've earned our way, who actually are logical and rational, to look at people like that being given precedence over us because we won't play the game and pretend all white people are bad and do whatever the masters behind the scenes tell us to do. So they overcorrect with quotas and preferences. They tell everybody that you fall into one or two groups. You're either an oppressor or you're a victim. How is that helpful? They moralize and shame straight from the woke handbook. Woke is presented as the unopposed, moral, righteous way of living our lives and running a society without ever being disputed or contested. That's one of the huge issues with DEI. There's little genuine problem solving. So they don't look and say, like I was mentioning before, hey, these kids aren't doing well on standardized tests. Let's look at the groups that do well on standardized tests, like a lot of Asian groups. What are they doing to do well on standardized tests? Why don't we teach our kids that? Ta-da! No, DEI would say, go to Harvard Medical School and tell them they have to take Black kids that don't qualify. So who's going to hire a Black doctor knowing that they don't have the qualifications to actually do the job? What about the really qualified Black doctors? They're being put in a group with people that don't have the knowledge, that don't have the acumen. We all pay for underqualified people being allowed in based on whatever group they happen to be in and the trends that happen to be going on. They promote on qualities other than merit. Usually has to do with your race, your gender, or your sexual orientation. I almost knocked something over. Your race, gender, or sexual orientation. That is not a good basis for giving someone a job and a position of authority. And they insert activism into everything. Part of the book that we did was talking about the harm that is in the mental health field based on all the universities now that are teaching people about being a psychologist or any kind of mental health professional, all teaching them to be activists, left-wing activists. So you come in with a serious problem, they're going to make it based on whatever the woke agenda says is really your underlying problem. They're not going to look at your background. They're not going to look at your perceptions and how you're handling the world. No. So, yeah, DEI is an issue. And it goes further than that. Whites are not being hired or are passed over for promotion by organizations claiming they want wider representation. And I wanted to tell you something. I looked this up, and a Bloomberg analysis of 88 S&P 100 companies found that in 2021, 94% of the net new jobs went to people of color. How is that hiring the most qualified people? White workers accounted for the remaining 6% of this net increase. What kind of society are we running where that sort of thing is viewed as okay? Oh, by the way, I would never be considered part of that 94%. When I had a job with Queensland government, although I do say this, that Queensland government in Australia hired me several years ago because they looked at me and saw I was a Black American woman and expected me to be very left wing. When they found out I wasn't, because they kept asking me questions about my political leanings, they could not have been worse. In fact, they discriminated against me so badly that I was told by a legal group in Australia that I could have actually sued them for discrimination based on the fact they did not like the fact that I was not left wing. So this is what we're dealing with. And we're looking at things like this. White silence is violence. So it's not even that you are saying or doing anything against people of color. You're blamed for your very existence. This is so dangerous, so dangerous. And if you've ever wondered why white women are agreeing to see abortion as an accomplishment, this sort of mindset is part of the reason why. It's a travesty. And anyone resisting something like this is called a fascist, a Nazi, a racist. I get told someone who has embedded white supremacy in my mindset. No, I'm a social scientist. This is absolute dangerous, dangerous crap. Now, please understand when I'm talking about people being activists, realize activism largely relies on emotional and primal responses to justify itself. So it's not intellectually based. It's not evidence based. And in fact, a lot of the evidence they use is fake. So it does not bear up under scrutiny. So they don't want you to look too closely. So they use emotions like wanting to belong and love and care and treating you like, oh, aren't you just the best? Or they use primal drives like anger and fear to embed these ideas into the mindset. So it's largely unresponsive to objective evidence. This is why I said to Elon, you need people like me to help really just get people out of the woke cult, because it is a cult. It is embedded indoctrination in their brains. That's why you can't just show them real facts. First of all, they probably won't look. They'll dismiss it. Find a way not to look because it's too painful to recognize that they've been basically conditioned to believe things that aren't true, that are actually harmful. And also, they are scared underneath it all because they've watched as anybody who disagrees with any aspect of the agenda is harshly punished. That's why they're so vicious, because they're not just being vicious to the outside group, they're teaching their own group, this is what will happen to you if you defy us in any way. Why do they do this? Because DEI activism makes white people easier to manipulate and exploit. And it intimidates many people into silence and compliance. If you're white, I want you to ask yourself something. Have you ever given in to something because you were afraid of what people would do if you stood up for yourself? And then it builds resentment, insecurity, and white people start to build resentment, and then minorities start to feel like, oh, I have to be given an extra hand up because I'm not really capable of achieving this on my own. What kind of insecurity is that causing? Nobody wins with this. You see this. And the civil rights movement, which was my guide for how to do this, promoted equality. I know that when I look online for people and I'm connecting with people or people connecting with me on LinkedIn, if they have equity anywhere in their label, I do not connect with them. Equity is a communist idea that says everybody should get the same outcome regardless of their input. Nobody wins with that. That's why those systems fall apart. We, the civil rights movement, those of us who have really gone out there and worked hard, we were looking for a level playing field, not reverse racism. And with the civil rights movement, we've had anti-discrimination legislation offering equal protection under the law. Now, I just wanted to tell you something else that I saw today. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division has restores equal protection for all in civil rights enforcement. So a lot of people were getting away with suing people for discrimination based on something they made up in their heads. The Department of Justice currently undid that. So we're getting back to what people struggled and died for in the civil rights movement. DEI works in opposition to fair and equal policies, and even more today than when I put this together yesterday, it may be fundamentally illegal because it's asking and demanding preferential treatment based on something other than whether you can do the job. And as far as a society goes, no society has ever thrived when you removed merit from accomplishment, whether it was a monarchy, whether it was ancient Rome, whenever they started appointing people as Caesar based on birth instead of based on capability, their society started to really suffer for it. And we look at Europe and the problem with the monarchy. Yeah, America doesn't want to remove merit from accomplishment. We don't want that downward spiral. We have to reduce bias, not simply reverse it. I am not looking for reverse racism, even though it would benefit me hypothetically. Although, as I said, they don't like the fact that I'm conservative and can see how dangerous that is. But if I shut up and complied and went along, it would benefit me in the short term. And I'd be part of our society's destruction. None of us want that. Now, bias that's done by you or to you is harmful. Here's one way. And as I said, if you want to know more, I have a course on this that is absolutely fascinating and important and gives you evidence you can use if you feel like someone is being biased against you. It makes you think, perceive, and interact and remember information differently if you have a bias. It's the way our brain works. So here's some tips. As we come towards the end, here's some anti-bias tips because I'm hoping enough of you are against becoming ardent racists who are still looking for a fair and just society that you're still with me here. So let's talk about what all of us can do to reduce bias in our lives. Resist the tendency to globalize or stereotype. Okay, and that's hard to do. Try to perceive what you see as individual acts and not as inherent aspects of a group. With recognition, it is really hard to do this when you constantly see the usual suspects acting in the usual way. Understand something. That is cultural norms. That is social contagion. It is not due to any kind of inherent inclination to behave that way. Black people would never have survived slavery if we were inherently as poorly behaved as the people you see in the cities right now. Tip 2, acting on your bias is a choice. I remember my dad said that as a Black man growing up in the South, in the pre-Civil War South, in the pre-Civil Rights South, that he admitted he was biased against white people, but he said, I will not allow myself to act on it. And he got tested because he only had daughters and we started to date. And we brought home every race known to humankind. And because he couldn't act on it, he actually started to lose it. By the time I started dating, and I started dating late, because I'm very tall and athletic, and that doesn't make me as appealing to men or teen boys as my smaller, bustier sisters. My first boyfriend was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed German, and my dad loved him. He was like a son to him. That wouldn't have happened if he kept acting on his bias. And one of the things I teach in my Healing the Rift course is basic, really easy tools so that you can stop letting your bias influence your choice. And by the way, being biased towards someone can also influence your judgment. So you could get yourself in a situation because you were not as discerning, because you were biased toward someone or toward a group. So either direction, bias is a problem. Rapid decisions and judgments make bias more likely. So the next time you're in a situation where you have an immediate inclination one way or the other, don't allow yourself to choose right away. Take some time, take some deep breaths, think about it. Think things through before you decide so that your bias is less likely to influence your decision. Tip 4, here's a big one. Mentally switch sides. When you have, and this is something far more for the other side than for us. I would say objectively, this is far more for the other side than for us. Consider how you'd react if one of us did it or one of them did it. If you're looking at something and you disapprove, especially for disapproval, ask, would you have the same reaction if we did that? How would you react if we did that? And I've noticed one of the biggest issues with the left is their hypocrisy, that they will vilify somebody for a made-up crime or a minor infraction when major crimes by their own side are excused or ignored. Can you imagine if the Hunter's laptop belonged to Donald Trump Jr.? Oh my God, he would be so far under the jail that he'd never see the light of day again. There would have been no excuses about hanging him from the rafters. One of the issues they have, and again, because the left is largely indoctrinated, they don't have a belief system. They've been indoctrinated to believe their narrative, and it makes it tough for us to deal with them. But if you can, ask the person, if we switch sides and it was your side that did this, how would you react? See if they'll actually do it. And again, remember something we talked about when we discussed Charlie Kirk. Even if that person won't do it, some of the people observing might be willing to do it, and you can influence them. Equality of conduct is an effective mitigator of bias. If you treat everybody civilly, you treat everybody the same, whether you agree with their lifestyle, who they are, or whatever, as though you're being filmed and observed, you'll find that bias is far less likely to influence how you treat people. And that's the goal. We want to treat people based on just human decency and based on what they bring to the table. Frank says something here that I think is interesting. He says, dealing with individuals one-on-one is much easier. Mob rule is dangerous. And he quotes, when you listen to fools, the mob rules. Absolutely, absolutely. But yeah, give yourself some time, walk away, ask yourself, how am I treating people? You know, they've actually done studies where they found people swore up and down that they had no bias, but then they filmed them interacting with people. And when they watched themselves on film, they could see it. So we want to get rid of that. And we can still win. And in fact, we will win in a much more effective and morally righteous way by just holding people accountable for what they do and giving credit where credit is due. But we have to be strong, because coming up against cult members makes it hard, because they certainly won't give us credit for anything. And you're dealing against that hypocrisy. That's a whole nother episode. Now, another thing you can do, speak up and keep records. When you're dealing with somebody with demonstrated anti-white bias, I want you to write it down. Write down the time, write down the date, write down what they said. Because you may actually have material for a legal case. And according to what was just reported today, by the DOJ Civil Rights Division, it's going to be a lot easier to prosecute than it was before, but you've got to have records. By calling you a racist, calling you a Nazi, calling you a fascist, all of that stuff was designed to keep you quiet and to allow for you to allow yourself to be taken advantage of. And I'm hoping you will remain open to options to improve outcomes for people who've been historically disadvantaged, as long as those options don't harm fairness and merit. And that's what the civil rights was about. It was like, let us come up with some solutions to improve educational outcomes or whatever. We're not asking for favoritism. I'm hoping that in spite of what's been going on over the last 10 years, that you still remain open to that. Demand merit-based hiring and promotions. Insist on judgment by content of character, not color of skin or sexual orientation or gender. Do not let yourself be bullied. And you can contact me also if you think you're being bullied. On X, on Rumble, on Daily Cloud, if you have any questions or comments, you can write it underneath and I will get back to you. Here is my company, Ethical Strategic Solutions. And again, I design all of my programs so that they embed in the brain in a way so that they're accessible when you need it. And what that results in is tangible results. You can actually measure how effective these programs are compared to what you usually get. And of course, nothing I do is woke. Everything I do is based on general humanity and decency and common sense. And as of next year, which is just a few weeks away, I'm going to start offering a lot of classes online. So we'll have 2 levels. We'll have a broad class that'll be super cheap for anybody to join in. And then we'll also have more exclusive classes with a smaller group, and everybody gets one-on-one time with me. Contact me on X at Dr. Dina 1 or at ethicalstrategic.com. That's my website. Look and see what I'm up to. Look and see what I have to offer. I hope that you got something. If you're white, I hope you got something out of this. Know that you are not only dealing with enemies. I hope you got some information that will help you stand up for yourself, to understand how we all lose when we allow this anti-white bias to continue. I am going to keep fighting against it. I hope you will too. And I'll see you next Tuesday. Please tell your friends. Have a good evening.